important one. That's all we care about.
All right, let's see what we can do together tonight. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 7-Eleven committee meeting. We're so happy to have you here tonight. And so we'll go ahead and get started with opening procedures. And we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag, of the United States of America, the republic for which it stands, one nation,
Under God, indivisible,
liberty and justice
for all.
Thank you, everyone. So we'll go ahead and next we'll move to roll call. And so as I call your name this evening, Mr. Don Gosney,
here.
Ms. Doreen Chand,
Here.
Mr. James Henry Sanders,
Here.
Ms. Wogley, Ms. Samantha Ann Torres,
Here.
Ms. Summer Sigler,
Here.
and Mr. Trey Holland. And I'll try to keep an eye on our participants for others that might be joining us a little bit late, but we do have a quorum. And so the next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda.
Move we approve.
Okay, and do we have a second?
I second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, it's unanimously approved. So the next item, and an item that I think everyone has a lot of questions about, just really want to start by appreciating everyone and thanking you for being here tonight. I know we haven't been together in quite some time, but we wanted to kind of scaffold some additional meetings and steps ahead. So we would really like to put together another meeting in March if possible, with the potential of presenting the 7-Eleven committee report to the board in April. There's 2 board meetings in April. They are April 26th and April 12th, I believe. So just wanted to share that. Also, we'll be sharing updates with the committee about the formation of the meetings and attendance as the Brown Act has changed. And so the emergency resolution that has allowed for remote meetings expires today. And so additional guidance will come on that. We're waiting to get the final word. But there'll be some additional requirements in order to call in from home versus attending the meeting in person. And we will be sharing that guidance with the committee once we get all of that confirmed. So the next item on the agenda tonight is public comment. So I wanted to open it up to see if we have any public comment tonight. Okay, not seeing any public comment at this time. We will move to the first discussion item. So the first discussion item tonight is we really wanted to share with you an update about some new legislation. It began as AB 2295, Assembly Bill in regards to local education agencies for which the district is and housing development projects. And so this is approved by the governor and officially adds section 65914.7 to the government code. Really, the purpose of this law was aimed at removing some of the procedural hurdles to teacher and workforce housing. So it eases some of the administrative and bureaucratic hurdles to develop teacher housing so that ultimately school districts can attract and retain quality teachers and staff. So why was this needed? So this isn't actually the first. The Teacher Housing Act really started in 2016. And then there was Assembly Bill 1157, which was approved by Governor Jerry Brown. And so this latest legislation is really kind of along those lines and further removes some of those procedural hurdles. Specifically, what the new legislation does is it overrides the local general plan and zoning process that would otherwise be required for school districts. And so there are some specific criteria for allowable projects. And so I did want to share a couple of those with the committee tonight. As I know at previous meetings, we did have inquiries about teacher housing specifically. And so the new legislation deems a housing development project an allowable use on any property owned by a school district if the project meets 11 specified criteria. Excuse me. And so kind of pertinent to this group, I wanted to share that development would need to consist of at least 10 housing units. The development would have a reported deed restriction to ensure that for a period of 55 years that the majority of the housing be set at an affordable rent to lower income or moderate income individuals. However, at least 30% of the units would need to be offered to lower income households. 100% of the units should be rented by district employees, local public employees, and general members of the public pursuant to a priority offering that would prioritize efforts to rent to school district employees and then to others to find interested or qualified district employees. This is the property is located on an infill site. And we have our property experts on the line, Scott and Barry, that could share a little bit more with you if you had questions about the infill site. But it essentially means it's a site in an urban area as determined by the 2020 US Census that meets either of the following criteria, and that's that the site is immediately adjacent to parcels that are developed with qualified urban uses, meaning any residential, commercial, public institution, transit or transportation, passenger facility, retail use, or combination of those. Or no parcel within the site was created within the past 10 years unless the parcel was created as a result of the plan of a redevelopment agency. And so this law will be effective starting January 1st of 2024. And goes until January 1st of 2023. And so I will be sharing some notes, kind of what I've just shared with you in the meeting minutes for the next meeting, but really thought it was important to bring this information to the committee and to kind of share with you. I know at previous meetings there were questions about workforce housing. And this legislation, I think, is just a further nod from the legislature that's really supporting and identifying that ongoing need. So I wanted to share that with you tonight. And so that's kind of the update that I have on that item. I don't know if there are any questions or comments at this time.
Melissa, just one question to clarification, if I can. You mentioned the timeline, and I think you said the sunset date was 2023. Was that? Did you mean 2033?
Yes, 2033. That is correct.
Okay, thank you. I didn't think that it was sunsetting before it started.
Yes, that's correct. 33. My apologies.
No problem.
All right. Well, I think at this time, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is really the meat and potatoes of tonight. And that is, we'll be turning it over to Scott to really share what is a draft report that is really just a collection of the components for the committee's kind of consideration and the different types of pieces. And so With that, I will turn it over to you, Scott.
Great. Thank you very much. And again, thanks everybody for being here and for having the patience and the fortitude to stick with this process. We really appreciate that. So this report, just like Melissa said, is a draft. What we wanted to do in sort of the overarching part of this was to make a summary of a lot of the things or all of the things that we talked about. And if you went through the draft report, you'll see of the issues that we talked about, the constraints, the opportunities, the different things on all the different properties. And what we now need from you as the 7-Eleven committee is to give us the direction and sort of the fill in the blanks portion of this, on the recommendations that you would like to have or to make to the Board of Trustees. So again, I'll make the assumption that everybody has taken a look at this and is generally familiar with it. And again, if there's things that we either missed or, we covered and is not in there, we can certainly add that. I think we got everything, but we want to make sure that we're complete. But really the completeness part of it comes from the final recommendations. And so, Melissa, I don't know if we just want to scroll through this, if that's the best way to do it. What's the sort of the thoughts of the committee members on this?
I'd like to see us scroll through and look at each item.
Before you go too far, on the edits, could you take the hyphen and possibly middle name out of with respect to my name?
Sure.
And
So
just either James Sanders or James H. Sanders.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Just James Sanders then?
Yeah, it works for me. Has
Okay.
most
We want to make sure that we're getting everybody reflected correctly. So, okay.
I'm not the result of a marriage between Henry Sanders and Henry Sanders. So.
I think we just pulled that off of the information that we had, but that's an easy change to make.
Thank you.
Okay, Melissa, I think you've got the control of the of all of this.
Yeah, so are you gonna walk through the components?
Yeah, we can. Again, I think that in terms of the components, and again, I'm hoping that everybody has a chance to read it. And there's a couple of ways to reflect on this. If there's things that don't make sense or incorrect or whatever, I mean, we want to hear about that. And again, at the end of the day, what we want to make sure is that there is a consensus with the committee on this. So again, I don't know what you guys are seeing. It's a fairly small thing on my screen in terms of that. I know that probably the in-house, or if you have a printed version of this in front of you, either way. But the executive summary is exactly that. It's a compilation. It's a history of what we've done, what we've talked about, some of the different, all the different sites, and then there's places to plug in, what we want. So I guess to start with, under the Adams site is that you can see that there are different things for each one of the identified sites. What is the goal of the committee? Is it to retain for district purposes? Is it to surplus it? Or is there an identified use that you would like to make in terms of a recommendation to the Board of Trustees? So that's
Scott, if Melissa could go down to the bottom where the little plus is, and click on that once, I think they'll make the document a little bigger.
yeah, but you won't get the full page.
Oh, okay.
I can see it fine. I'm wearing glasses. I just want to make sure everybody else can, understand what it is that they're looking at. So does that make sense? Again, this is the executive summary part. This will come out of the, obviously there's more verbiage in there in terms of sort of the methodology or whatever the thoughts that the committee would like to express in here. But this is, again, this is a summary. A 7-Eleven committee is put together to determine what recommendations to make to the board. And the recommendations are, keep it for district purposes, surplus it. And then that opens up different avenues for the district to be able to look at. That could be, the creation of housing. It could mean the exchange of that property. It could mean ground leasing that property for revenue creation. Or, is there another identified use that this committee would like to recommend that the board consider? Again, there's only 4 sites and pretty straightforward. A lot of the report has to do with, again, sort of the opportunities and constraints, the things that we talked about at our prior board meeting or prior committee meetings. And again, I guess from my perspective, that's sort of the lens that we need to look at this, because at the end of the day, it is a recommendation to the board. Is there any
Yes.
questions on what we're trying to achieve here?
Mr. Gosney?
Yeah, thank you very much. This is just a procedural issue here, not content. But going over a document like this, it's very helpful, first off, if there are page numbers on there, so we can refer to a specific page, especially when it's as difficult as it is to see on the small screen. But also reviewing a document like this, inserting line numbers also is very helpful. Go to line 487, as opposed to us trying to scroll back and forth to try to figure out where we're at on these. And even when it goes to the board, having line numbers can make it easier for everybody to be reviewing back and forth if they have a question about a particular item on there. Just a thought.
Yeah, that's a good point. I thought we had page numbers on there, but I'm seeing that because I'm looking at the Word version. We will absolutely make that. I'm surprised that we missed that. So my bad on that one.
I'm looking at the PDF that was sent to us, and I'm not seeing line numbers at all.
No, there's not, and I'm looking at the Word version, so that there's not on there. I know I thought we had that on there. We don't know why. I don't know how I missed that. So we will absolutely do that. The line numbers, it starts looking a little bit like a legal document when you do that. Again, that would be my only thought on doing line numbers, because I look at a lot of legal documents and they're all line numbered like that, but it just kind of gives a different feel to the report. That's my own thought, but we'll do whatever what the committee would like to do on that.
Okay. Ms. Torres?
Hi, real quick. So if I'm understanding the purpose of our meeting tonight, the point of tonight is basically, I'm looking at, again, to Dawson's point, page numbers, look at the draft committee recommendation section. The point of tonight is just to say whether X property should or should not be exchanged for the highest and best use. That's it, or are we also providing recommendations for ideas, or is it just yes or no? Well, what are we doing tonight?
The purpose is to come up with what, from a consensus perspective from the committee, what you would like to recommend to the district. And again, the recommendation could be, there's really 3 things. You can retain it for district purposes. So let's use it as an example. We talked about this, the Harmon Knoll site. That has the least impediments to being able to develop it. If you remember, there was a lot of impediments to repurposing some of the other sites for a variety of different reasons. But that could be, okay, well, the Harmon Knoll site, in theory, you could say it's a fairly level site. It's next to a park. The board, or the committee could come up with a recommendation that we think that this site should be retained for district purposes for future educational uses. That would be a recommendation. You could also come up with a recommendation to say, no, we don't believe that the district is going to need that site in the future for whatever reason. It's too small, it's not in the right location, whatever. And so we recommend that you surplus it. You could also come up with a recommendation that says, we don't want you to, we would like you to actually, go through and create revenue through, either ground leasing or through an exchange. We'd like to develop, we'd like the district to consider development of teacher housing, as Melissa just went through. There's legislation on that. So the purpose of this is for your voice to be heard at the board level of what, after you've studied these properties, what would you recommend that the board do? Does that answer your question, Samantha?
Yes, I just wasn't clear if we were deciding if tonight was just to recommend to keep the property or to surplus it, but we are making recommendations for potential uses. And I just wanted to clarify that that is what we're going to get out of tonight.
Correct. That's the feedback that we would like. So again, we've, the sort of the check the box thing that is highlighted on there are those are, the potential, what would you like to recommend on each one of these? And again, when you're looking at that, so let's take the portal aside, which has different issues with it. And again, that is the, it's on a hillside. There are geological constraints. The potential of probably doing another educational facility on that are very small and would be extremely difficult to do. And then, by the way, Melissa, I sent this to you. I'm not sure what happened on that, but there was a superimposing of that old picture on the new one. We'll fix that. I wanted to let everybody know that. So it actually shows it, and that was a red line thing where it take out and then it came back in again. I'm not sure how that happened, but it did. But anyway, there's a lot of topography issues, there's slope issues, there's landslide issues, and that all that stuff combined, as we discussed, probably makes it very difficult to do a school on it or any kind of educational type thing. But it doesn't preclude necessarily somebody coming, making a recommendation. We would like the board to consider surplusing this site and then going through a process where there's a creation of new housing or something else that would be appropriate that you guys feel would be a good land use for it. So we've spent some time helping everybody understand what the parameters were and why something may or may not work from a purely logistical perspective. But again, at the end of the day, it's your recommendation of what you would like to see and recommend that the board do.
We have a couple of other hands raised. Ms. Doreen Chan.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I'll follow on to Samantha's question. So I understand that, for each side, we're determining as a committee whether we're going to retain it for district purposes, view it as a surplus property, and then, come up with the appropriate identified use for each location. When we come up with the identified use, what do we have to sort of provide the reasonings for why we made a decision one way versus the other? So in your example for the Harmon Knowles side, if the recommendation was to develop it, so not retain it, but use it as surplus property, then do we have to say why we didn't want to retain it?
No,
Or that's not necessary?
I don't believe, I think it's helpful to have a rationale behind it. It's not legally required, but I think it's helpful for the board to understand why it is that you made that decision. And again, one of those may be that we don't believe that the district needs this in the future. And it could be used as a school site, but we don't believe it's going to be needed in the future. So therefore, we think that you should surplus it. And the appropriate land use would be to create use it as a potential residential site development that would create revenue for the district.
Thank you, that's helpful.
So one of the things that is in the draft report that I wanted to share was towards the end in section 4, there's a section that's really dedicated to the committee findings and recommendations. And so we really tried to take what we heard at the committee and really what the conversations were and kind of provide some of that language for the committee's consideration. And so you'll notice here, there's some language that is italicized, and it was just capturing some of the issues that were discussed with some of the properties that we have, which I think kind of aligns with the question that you were just asking. And so this is just draft language. And so this is the committee's report to the board. And so this can be edited to reflect, the desire of the committee, but we did try to put together really some of the language that supported the conversations that we've had over the previous meetings. I know Mr. Sanders, had your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the recent legislation that you just mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. And that is, with respect to the highest and best use, if we start focusing on low-income housing, that to me seems in conflict with the idea of the greatest return for the possible legal use or redevelopment of the school property. So I would like that addressed by our consultants as we go through this, because if we're talking about an income derived form of valuation, if we're going for low income and the low income residents or users are supposed to generate the return on the property, then it seems to me just that we're going to get a lower return, and that's in conflict with the highest and best use. So that's all I'd like to have addressed later on.
No, and I'm happy to address that. I'm dealing with that right now with another school district. How we would propose the committee frame this, if you came up with a recommendation so that said, we don't believe that this, the first thing is this site compatible and appropriate for the board to consider retaining it for future educational purposes? That's kind of the first level of question that you need to ask yourself. And if the answer to that question is no, it is not, again, for the reasons like we talked about, the Portola site, there's hillsides, Adams has, geologic things and things, things like that you would not be able to do another school on, then that's kind of checkbox number one. Okay, then the next checkbox is, what would you like the board to consider? And if it is to surplus and create the most amount of revenue for the district, then it should be framed that way. And again, that can be through, whatever the land use is, pretty much it's all going to be residential type land uses. Or you could say, yeah, we'd like to surplus it, but we would like the board to consider, different potential workforce housing options, or, whatever, which I can tell you will generate less money. So if the recommendation is to create the most amount of money that would go back into the district for educational purposes in terms of revenue, general fund revenue, then it is the recommendation would be framed similar to, we would like the board to consider, achieving the highest and best use and the most financial return, from this asset, either through an exchange, through a ground lease, or other form, of disposing of the property. Does that help answer your question, James?
A little. When we get to Adams, I just, I've gotten inquiries from the surrounding community about the Adams site, which I have not addressed directly and referred them to the district rather than my trying to answer them, because I can't speak for the committee. I can't speak for the district. So I really didn't want to address them, but nevertheless, there's this keen interest in the Adams site, which is different from Seaview, Harmon Knolls, or Portola.
Mm-hmm.
So when we get there, there may be more questions, but
yeah, but again, the threshold. Let me go back to the threshold question. So the threshold question is, and I'll use Adams as an example, is Adams an appropriate site for the district to consider retaining that property for educational purposes? And the answer to that, at least in our opinion, is no. For all the reasons that we went through, the geological issues and things like that. But that doesn't mean that you can't make a recommendation that, the board should consider, disposing or doing something with the site. Disposal is a legal term, not flush it down the toilet type thing, but disposing of the property to other educational uses or whatever creates the highest value for the district. So you can frame these things in different ways.
Okay,
But again, the threshold question is, should the district retain this property? If you say yes, then, okay, we're done with that. Right? We don't need to, we think that you should retain it for future educational purposes. And here's why, because we think you're going to need it. It's developable and you're done. If you're going to say the district cannot use this property for educational purposes, then the district should probably surplus it. And then what would be the recommendations for the ultimate use of that property? So those are the 3 steps right there.
and as I recall, the geological issues on Adams was the distance from the known trace of the Hayward Fault.
That is the significant issue with that. Yes, the fault actually runs through the property.
I'm not sure about the through property. I know it follows Arlington, but, okay. So whatever use is given to that site would have to be compatible with, the distance from the known trace. And really, the fault is not a single line, but a system, as I recall.
May I just suggest that we discuss Adams time?
That we what?
If we could discuss the details about the Adams site when we get to the Adams point, because we haven't actually gotten to discussing Adams yet.
And that's fine. I'm just trying to frame this in terms of the sort of the selection process, that the committee needs to look at, the sort of the lens of, you're going to make a recommendation, and here's the steps that you have to do in order to do that.
Perfectly happy to postpone this discussion until we get to that.
Okay, Mr. Gosney?
Thank you. I see Doreen's hand is still up ahead of mine.
Sure.
Sorry, I didn't know how to put that down, but let me do that now. But since I did get picked on, anytime you select retain, it's always retained for future use, right? And we don't know what that next period of reevaluation would be. Is that a correct assumption?
It is. And again, the direction or the recommendation that you're giving to the board is that the committee believes that this can be used for future district purposes, for educational purposes.
Got
And so that's great. Then you would do that, and that would be your recommendation. And the recommendation is because we believe this, this, and this.
Got it.
There is no time limit on that. It could be the next month. It could be 25 years down the road.
And let me also, just frame this, because this is a recommendation. So the board can, will take this in, and that's why it's important to, articulate the reasons for the recommendation. So the board can take that in and understand that the committee did their homework, looked at the properties, looked at the overall, community that makes up West Contra Costa Unified School District, and you're making these recommendations based on what you feel are going to meet the needs of the district. And the needs of the district could be for future education. It could be for income. It could be for the creation of housing. That's the thing that the board is going to want to look at, want to understand, and that, we need your thoughts on as, members of this committee and residents of this area.
Okay, Mr. Gosney?
Thank you. I truly appreciate all the information that we received on the previous 4 meetings. It's been a tremendous amount of information. It's been very informational. I've learned a lot on there. And our meetings have been packed. We've never had a full attendance of our committee at these meetings. And even now, we've only got half, a little over half of the people It's, the problem I've got is on procedure here. It was just mentioned a little bit ago that in this draft report that was not prepared by the committee, but prepared by staff and consultants, as to that our discussions were included in here. We really haven't had discussions. We haven't had an opportunity to talk with each other hardly at all in the previous 4 meetings. I'd say we've discussed more tonight than we have in the previous 4 meetings. We could ask a question now and then, but numerous times we were actually told we're out of time. The last meeting in particular, I had my hand up for a very, very long time on 2 occasions. And at the last time, I finally said, no, we're over our budget for the meeting by 17 minutes. We got to adjourn. Because we didn't have a chance to talk with each other. We've never had contact information for each other where we could call each other or email each other to discuss anything or ask questions amongst each other. We've just been receiving information. We haven't had discussions about any of these, not in my mind at least. So to be able to go before the board and present the report that was prepared by others, and this is not a reflection on this report. It's a good report, but it's not from the committee. It's like we're being asked almost to rubber stamp something that was prepared by others as a recommendation. And I just don't feel comfortable with that at all.
Mr. Gosney, I think it wasn't quite that. To have a report, you have to start with a draft and come from somewhere. And you contacting each other, this is a Brown Act meeting, would be inappropriate. But we're not trying to say this is the report. We want to start with this and want you to say where we should change it, so that we don't have to have the committee write the report, but you can take out sections, whole pages, say, no, the point of view was this, and the way it's reflected now is that, and we don't like that. We'd be more than happy to do that. It's not, we're speaking for the committee. We wanted to give you a draft to begin your work with.
You know, I do understand about the Brown Act issue, but we can still discuss things with half of the committee without being in violation of the Brown Act, but we were never really given that opportunity because we never had information. Didn't have phone numbers, didn't have email addresses. We had no opportunity to discuss, and we certainly didn't have opportunities to discuss a one-on-one conversation or 1-on-8 conversation with the rest of the committee at these meetings. I mean, I just don't feel comfortable about.
And we're not opposed to that discussion in any fashion at all.
So how would the committee like to look at this? Again, what we've tried to do is give a framework and the information in summary form of what we've discussed, and there's been a lot of information. So and I get that, and so, but how would you like to go about? Would you like to take each one of these individually and talk about them now? Because that's the point of what we're trying to do, and to get a consensus from the committee on each one of these 4 sides.
Again, speaking just as one member of the committee, if we can dispose of a certain number of sites, I personally think we can dispose of 3 of the sites at one sitting. It's the Adams site that where things get touchy. And then the higher and best use issue has to be addressed relative to workforce housing development. And that's a new issue.
Well, it's been around for a while. There's like all good legislative actions. There's always things that happen over time with adding new things or new nuances or closing loopholes or opening up loopholes, whatever it happens to be. So again, I guess I'm going to look at it from the real estate perspective, which is what we've tried to bring to the committee is that perspective of it's hard to defy the laws of gravity. And the laws of gravity for a couple of these sites are, are significant. And, for educational purposes, forget about anything else. For educational purposes for the school district. So again, that's the threshold question right there. How I see this, and again, this is just how I see it, is that when I look at the 4 sites and we've done the research and all the other things that we've shared with you, from title reports to geological reports to all of the different zoning, all of that. The only one that looks like it could be used without the constraints, that make it very, very difficult for educational purposes is Harmon Knolls. But this committee could say, we don't really care. We think that that's a good developable site and that would create, revenue for the school district that they need. And we'd like to surplus it and have the board consider, disposing of this site in a way that creates the most revenue. Or you could say, no, we want to hang on to it. Again, there's 4 sites and the first, decision that needs to be looked at is it should the district retain it or should they get rid of it? And if there's questions on that threshold, then that's the first place to start.
So I want to make sure we hear from Ms. Torres.
Thank you. I just, a point of clarification, there was a comment made earlier about selling the land and the funds going into the general fund. I understood that if we were discussing surplusing, that the funds for sales or leases would be earmarked for specific budget or a specific pool of money. I thought it was for capital improvements. Could I get some clarification from our experts here?
Yeah, and when we always recommend our clients not sell the property, because then you've got an asset, you've gotten the money for it, and you've spent it, and it's gone for all time. What we like to encourage in terms of that process is to create either, do a ground lease or do an exchange agreement where the district ends up with an asset that maybe can create revenue, or it's another piece of property that could be used for educational purposes. So you take a property that would be very difficult to do, have educational for a public school district like Portola, and you say, I want to exchange that. I want another piece of property in a particular area, and we would like to recommend to the board that they consider exchanging that property for a property that can be used for educational purposes or can be used to generate revenue. The legal part of that is if you do a ground lease or if you do an exchange of property, that the revenue that comes out of that is general fund, and it can't be. I mean, it can be earmarked for by a public agency or public body like a school board, but then in 2 years when that board changes or whatever, it can be earmarked for something else. There's nothing that you can't commit future boards to doing things. If you, again, that's just how that works. That's a law thing. So
any revenue generated from these properties can be used in any pot of money that the board decides.
It's general fund revenue. So yes.
Got it.
Now, they can't use it to go on trips to Hawaii. So, but they can use it for for purposes of, what the needs are for educating. They can buy, more pencils. They can do, it's general fund. It's completely discretionary at the board level, what to do with that. But the nice part about that is that if you go through an exchange process or you do a ground lease, you still have the underlying asset there. You haven't gotten rid of that asset. You've got revenue that's generated off of that. That can be spent in any way the board chooses. But the asset is still there.
A clarification on that, Ms. Torres. Let's say that you had a piece of property and it now generates $100,000 a year. And you exchange it. Property A for B, and the advantage is B now produces 100,000. And the Board of Education and the community decide, we really love this art program we have, or rocket science program, whatever. And for the next 5 years, we're going to dedicate that revenue towards that program. That would be the type of thing. And you would still have, as Scott mentioned, the underlying property value. So a future board 15 years from now could have that revenue, and it might be something completely different. That help?
Hey, Mr. Gosney?
Thank you. The idea of earmarking any money, capital improvements, art programs, or anything like that. The problem is all of that comes out of the general fund anyway. And let's just say that we earmark it for, or the board earmarks it for capital improvements. Well, then the board just decreases their normal budget towards capital improvements and uses this money for that, and uses with the previously allocated capital improvement money for other projects. It doesn't really change things. I mean, they're still going to spend only so much money for a program or so much money for capital improvements. So I'm not sure that, you know, us making any recommendation, for instance, for earmarking it is going to have that much of an effect. That's just, I worked around school districts and city councils for just too many decades to believe otherwise.
I would concur with you. Excuse me. I would concur with you that when we're in a down cycle, which may be coming up in 24, and declining enrollment, and nobody wants to give a program away. So how are you going to keep that program? It may be exactly what you said, Mr. Gosney.
I just wanted to point out that my question wasn't because I wanted to make recommendations about how funds would be used. I had a misunderstanding about where the revenue generated would be what pot of money that would go into. So I wasn't implying anything like that. It just
General fund, it would go into the general fund. And that would be a decision at the discretion of the board. So again, you know, these are all great questions, you know, in terms of all of that. And what we found in the past is making, you know, in terms of structuring, you know, the recommendation, it's good to keep it general, because again, the board is going to do what the board's going to do in terms of how they're going to look at this, or if the recommendation is to say we want to exchange this for something that's going to create revenue. I think that's where that thing needs to end. I mean, the goal is to create revenue that will support the ongoing needs of the school district through the general fund, through the creation of more money for the general fund. But again, kind of coming back to the 4 assets or the 4 sites that the board has identified that they would like this committee to look at, there's still the sort of that threshold question of, and maybe that's a good place to start, is to take a look at the at each one of these sites again. And you can see we've created a page here that Melissa has put up on the screen that, you know, here's the encumbrances, here's the recommendations, here's the priority uses of that. So again, it's helping. What we're trying to do is help you, you know, be able to frame all of this stuff, taking the information that you've received and being able to give, you know, good consideration to, you know, why you're making, here's again, the threshold question. Should you keep it? Should the board district keep it for educational purposes or do something else with it?
Well, and one of the things, if I could, I want to really appreciate and acknowledge Mr. Gosney's comment about the concern about the report, right? It's like, here's a drafted report, right? I know that the intent was not to say, okay, here's the report and just take it as it is. But what I think might be really helpful is if we kind of went back to where we started, which was kind of just walking through the components of the report and sharing that with the committee. So that we would be able to express the pieces that we put in the report with draft language for your consideration. And I know we talked about that, so we kind of jumped around a little bit, and I thought it might be helpful if we kind of just went back to the components and then maybe went into the conversations with the site. So if I could, Scott, if I could just maybe do a quick walkthrough with the committee.
Sure.
So I know that it's small and I apologize for that. So I have zoomed in so you won't see the entire page. But essentially the report starts and it identifies essentially the team members. So we have our board, we have our 7-Eleven committee members, and then it identifies district staff and consultants that have been participating in the committee to date. So there is a table of contents. And then the sections are as follows. As Scott mentioned, there's an executive summary, which is really just that. It's a very high level overview of the 7-Eleven committee. As members may recall, we kind of started out the committee with having legal counsel come and provide a presentation where they kind of went through the 7-Eleven committee kind of specifically as outlined in statute, and shared a little bit with us about Brown Act. And so those materials are available. There's a summary here that needs to be completed with the board dates when we reduced the membership of the committee. And then there's an identification of the 4 sites. And as Scott had pointed out at the beginning of the meeting, for each one, there's kind of this identification of those 3 steps for each property, and that consideration: should it be retained for district purposes? Does the committee recommend that it be deemed surplus? And then if so, what is the recommended intended use for the board's consideration? And so you can see that's provided here for the 4 properties that we've been reviewing. The next section of the report, and you'll notice kind of in the report that there's a lot of reference to statute, and the report was really trying to just align with what the statute says. And so there's the purpose of the committee, the identification of the membership and the categories represented, which we also find from statute. Then there's a description of the legal process for surplus property disposition. There is a section dedicated to the charge of the committee. And again, that identifies the Ed Code statute that identifies kind of here are the tasks of the committee. There's a summary of the work, which identifies the meetings and then points to the district website where we have the historical recordings of the meetings, the meeting agendas and minutes, and then the different types of presentations and materials that have been made available. There's a summary of the meetings with the date and kind of what was reviewed at each meeting. That leads to essentially, right, meeting 4, this is where we are today. And so where we go from here in terms of how many additional meetings the committee would like to have to develop the recommendations and the draft report is to the committee. And then ultimately, once the committee establishes a draft report, then we will publicize that to the community, invite people to review the draft report, which we'll make available on the district website. We'll have another 7-Eleven committee meeting, which the community will be invited to come and kind of respond to the recommendations of the committee. And that's when the committee can receive kind of that public input and then adopt a final draft report to move forward to the board. And so there's a lot of sections of this draft report that will continue to be developed. After that, there's a section that's really dedicated to the property descriptions. And so This is the identification of those details that are provided for each property. And then it jumps into the section that we were looking at where there's a page for each property that gives us kind of the picture that you might recall from some of the slides that we've looked at. And then a table at the second half of the page, which is summarizing that property information that was defined on the earlier page. And so we have that for each one of the properties of the 4. And then at the end, there is some legal definitions for what does surplus mean, what is highest and best use, additional considerations. And this is really kind of helping to identify what we've heard from the board. And then method of public notification. So this will be once the committee has a draft report that they would like to have posted and advertised to the community. And so then here is kind of, right, we started at the end and we're back again. And so towards the end is really a draft of the committee's findings and recommendations. And so at the beginning, it really, again, is aligning with statute definitions so that everybody kind of understands the use of the words and what some of these things mean, because they have defined meanings. And then at the end, this is where really, when we do that 3-step process that Scott was mentioning, where we start with, should the district retain the property? Step 1, should we deem it surplus? And then if deemed surplus, what is the recommended use? So this is where we took some language that really kind of defined the discussions of the properties, just as draft language. And you can see there are these areas where it says, insert reasons why it is not used or cannot be used by the district, which we've talked about for some of our properties that we're not able to use for educational purposes. And then at the end, you see here the draft committee recommendations, and where it basically is, for the property, it should or should not be exchanged for highest and best use, and then what that recommended best use would be if feasible. And so really the conclusion has just a little draft paragraph. And then the appendices would include really, I think, the volumes and volumes of materials, presentations. I really want to appreciate and thank Mr. Gosney. Unfortunately, review and approval of the meeting minutes was not agendized, so we didn't look at that, but you may have noticed in your packet tonight that based on the last presentation from council, Mr. Gosney provided a full transcription of the presentation that we as a committee received from legal counsel that really went over the different options for the disposition of real property, which was a super meaty and heavy, almost training style opportunity. And so Mr. Gosney has provided to the committee a transcription of that, which is accompanied here in your packet along with the meeting minute, or excuse me, the presentation. So we would take essentially all of the materials that have come before the committee that are available on the 7-Eleven committee website, and we would build those into the appendices so that when the report goes to the board for their consideration of the committee's work, they would be able to see that full compilation of those resources. And so I hope that that was helpful in kind of just identifying the different parts and pieces of the draft. In no way was it intended to be, here's a draft report, fill in a few blanks and let's call it good. It was really intended to just provide kind of the outline of different components of the report. And so I know that we'd like to have some site-specific conversations about the properties and maybe walk through those 3 different steps that we had talked about earlier, but after kind of presenting the overview of the report, I just wanted to open it up to the committee and see if there were any questions or comments, or maybe even better, some recommendations on how the committee would like to tackle the draft report or prepare their own report that would essentially identify kind of those different pieces. And Ms. Torres?
I propose we spend the rest of the time, because chances are we are all very chatty. So we probably won't get through all 4 sites tonight. So I'd like to get started. So we can make sure we get as much as we can out of this conversation before our next meeting.
Perfect. Mr. Sanders?
This is the first time I've seen the draft report. So, and I checked my email while I was sitting here and I didn't see an attachment for the draft report. Was it sent out?
So it was attached to the website. So the challenge that we had is this draft report is so big that it would come as a link because the attachment's too big. So we posted it on the district website in 2 places. And there was a link in your email that you could click on that would download it, but it wasn't attached as an attachment to the document.
Okay.
And I do apologize for that. One of the things that we could do that I think would make the report a more manageable size is if we took the pictures out. I think maybe we could compress the size of the file. I'm happy to provide the draft in Word form to the committee members if committee members wanted to make changes, you know, in whatever way that you guys would like to have access, we'd be happy to provide it. But specifically to answer your question, it wasn't attached as an attachment to the email just because it was too big in file size.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Gosney.
Just to refer, in the email itself, the second paragraph, the committee meeting electronic agenda and meeting documents are available. Meeting documents was a hyperlink where you could then download.
Right, but there's not a specific reference to the draft report.
No,
That is correct.
It's
So-
in
so
the
you-
packet.
I understand that. So, I mean, we've had documents.
Mm-hmm,
So to know that there's something new,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I didn't see a flag saying, you ought to go look. Because I'm a paper person,
Mm-hmm.
so I really like having paper so I can make whatever comments I have on it.
Mm-hmm.
Having it on a screen on my computer, oh wow, wonderful. But that doesn't help a dinosaur, which I suppose I am these days.
Well, and I understand, we have a couple paper copies tonight, so you're welcome to take a paper copy. If anyone would like a paper copy mailed to them, we can mail it to you. If anybody would like to pick up a paper copy, we can have that available here at our office for pickup. So I really want you to see me as your resource and support. So I absolutely agree and acknowledge your comment about it didn't really call that out and say, hey, be sure to check out the draft report. But I do want to take it as an opportunity to just reach out to everybody and say, whatever, everybody has kind of a different style. And so whatever supports your style, that there is something that we as staff can do to support you. We're happy to do that. So please just, you know, absolutely let me know, you know, and we'll do it right away.
Okay, thank you.
So, I see 2 hands. I'm sorry, I didn't see which one went up first. So, Ms. Torres? Okay, Ms. Chan?
Nicely done, Melissa, and thank you for that overview you just provided. One thing I don't see in this draft report, or maybe I missed it, is Terra Realty's summarized recommendation. Where is that detail?
you know, we don't want to give you the language that you would like to see things in. I mean, we want the committee to, you know, basically make the recommendations. What we did was we outlined some of the constraints and some of the other issues that we found would, you know, at least in our opinion, would make it very difficult for the district to be able to use those sites as educational purposes or for educational purposes.
Right, where are those findings?
They're in.
Maybe recommendation isn't the right word, but where's the details on that?
She kind of went through all of that, and it's in part of that is the report is a summary, and a big part of the report is the addendum or the appendix.
Right.
You know, all of that too. So
I see a few notes here in the proposed property description sections, but I don't see the kind of things we had talked about, you know, what makes this not ideal for use, and here's why, that detailed findings. I don't see that anywhere here.
Okay, so
Yes.
here, so she's got, Melissa just put, I don't know what, again, page 20.
Yeah, this is draft language. You know,
That's
once we
draft
make a
language,
decision, this is
exactly.
draft language, that I get. But I'm saying, you know, I believe it was maybe the third or second meeting we had where your team provided an overview, in-depth overview of each property, the pros and cons.
Mhm.
Where's that information?
That is in the appendix, and it will get, you know, what we want is to take your words, yours being the committee's words, and saying, here's what we want. And there's a section in here, and I think we went past it. Again, I don't remember which page it's on, where each one of these sites is identified, and you know, here's a recommendation, and here's why we have a recommendation. And it could be for every site's going to be different. So let's say Seaview. So Seaview, we recommend that the district, you know, not retain this for educational purposes. And I'm just saying this, but you need to have that.
Right. No, I get the committee's role is to make the recommendation,
Right.
but those recommendations are based off of, you know, the research your team has done, you know, making a sound decision. So we've had a lot of research and input and things to think about. So I wanted to see where that, I see the slide decks here for the initial presentation. But I didn't see the information from your team. So that's why I wanted to refer back.
Yeah, and so again, what we've tried to do is help frame each property from the real estate perspective as to, you know, what the constraints or opportunities are. And, you know, we need you to draw your conclusions from that information, taking that information.
And maybe something that I could do as a resource, just kind of listening. So, we haven't put together that compiled set that has all of the different materials from all of the different meetings in one place. And so I imagine that is something really helpful, right? We've been meeting all the July. And so one of the things I'd be happy to do is work with the team tomorrow to put all of the documents together, and maybe just send that out to the committee. So you'll have, right, each meeting, here were the presentations, the different pieces of materials. Because we've reviewed so much. Mr. Sanders has a lovely binder that he brings to the meeting that has it with tabbies in it. I've got my paper, but we'd be happy to put together, oh no, my computer might die. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, Melissa, that's where I'm getting at, right? To make an informed decision, we have to have all the pieces.
Share your chart.
Ms. Chan, what we didn't want to do was spoon feed you the ideas. You're absolutely correct. You as a committee will decide on the what you're going to recommend to the board. We can then help with the how to be able to do that. And we did share with you some hows.
Right. No, I got the hows, but on the what's, I feel like I still need to, I mean, we've looked at the properties. We had that initial overview in the first meeting about, you know, where it's located, how, what's currently used for. I got that high bird's eye view on these, but I didn't see anywhere in this document or report, I should say, details about some of the drawbacks on the locations.
When the committee's ready, both Scott and I are very opinionated about what kinds of things you might want to look at. But
Right.
those should be coming from the committee, and we'll be more than happy to go through the pluses and minuses in detail with the financial analysis that goes with it.
Got it. Okay.
And again, that was all done so the report is a summary form of all the stuff that's happened in any situation like this. So what we wanted to do was make sure that we took the information, or the committee took the information that both Nancy Taylor with Orbach Huff put together, which we put together, on the real estate side of things. And then from that the extraction process that really needs to happen is for the committee to say, okay, we understand all this stuff, hopefully. And if you don't, then that's a different issue. But we understand, all the things that we went through the different stages of the committee and the meetings and stuff like that. We understand, we tried to do at least a very quick summary of a lot of that backup stuff, with understanding that we didn't necessarily need to replicate all that backup stuff again. That was tied back to the final report.
Okay, Mr. Sanders?
I just want to make an observation that page that you had up before with the photograph and the table all on one page. The last 3 boxes were blank, so I assume that we as a committee in reviewing the draft report, we're going to fill in the boxes. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's why they're blank.
Okay.
So what are your recommendations? The site encumbrances, what are your recommendations? What are your priority uses?
Okay. I'm fine. I'll lower my hand.
Yeah, everything else is just, what is it? And that's not really, it's just more the facts, of what's there. It's up to the committee to determine, okay, we understand what the constraints are, what the opportunities are, our recommendation is. And here's why.
What fits for West Contra Costa School District?
So now that we've kind of done that walkthrough, let's transition to some of the site-specific conversations and maybe focus in on those 3 areas, because as you mentioned, if the answer is retain the school site, then that's the consideration. If the consideration is that due to restrictions with the site, we're not able to use it for educational purposes, then it leads us to the next question. And so I think maybe that's a good place to transition into.
And I would agree, because there's a threshold question, and then that leads, one of 2 ways.
Well, and I heard earlier in the meeting that Adams maybe is a trickier site. So do we want to maybe start at the back and work our way?
Yeah, thank you.
Should we start with Seaview maybe?
Wherever the committee would like to start. I want to make sure that the committee understands, kind of the process and what the end result of this thing is, which is you're making a recommendation to the board to do something with these sites.
Okay. Can I start with Seaview? I'm very
Absolutely.
familiar
That
with
would be great. Take us away.
In terms of surplus, absolutely, the site, when it was a school, was hard to reach. It was this modular design, which was impossible to teach in, and even as offices, it didn't work very well. So, and it's next to the railroad. So for all those reasons, I can't see an educational purpose for it. The existing community is served by other schools. So that which is north the north, no, we'll call it northeast of the creek. In my humble opinion, should be developed as a residential use. And that which is south of the creek should be deeded over to the park district for them to use. And it should be disposed of. That's my feeling.
And then maybe as opposed to another way of framing this, and I agree with what you're saying, James. You know, with the, you know, so there, you answered, and I'm not saying that the rest of the committee agrees or disagrees, but you answered one question from your perspective, is that this is not a site that is a good site for educational purposes, and here's the reasons why. The second part of that is, well, what should the district do with that and with that information, or what direction would you like to give the board to consider doing? And, you know, you said, you know, dispose of the property. You know, again, not necessarily a sale. I don't like that term, but that's just for me. But
Yeah.
dispose of the property in a way that can create new revenue for the district. Maybe that's a way of phrasing that. And I'll leave that up to you. I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth.
As I recall, we're presented with a map that showed that it was already parcelized, if that's the proper term. And the surrounding uses of the land right now are residential R1. And to be consistent with the surrounding uses of the land and given the capacity of the streets to handle additional traffic, it seems, in my humble opinion, that continued use in R1 zoning would be the appropriate, highest and best use for that land.
Correct. But for the district to dispose of that, you know, for residential purposes, which could create revenue. And then what I also wanted to address, you mentioned on the south side there, or actually, yeah, the south side across the Garrity Creek.
Right.
Yeah, that area right there, that rather than framing it in a specific way, maybe it would be another way of potentially framing that would be that land is, you know, we went through the stuff on, you know, what you could use the land for, what you can't use in the floodplain. It's got all kinds of different issues with it. Maybe it's to work with a way to look at that, or a way to frame that is for the board to work with other public agencies that might be able to utilize this land in a better way. And that kind of leaves the door open for, well, because what you don't want to do is ever give stuff away. So if you do something with, and we've talked to the Park and Rec, and they were at our very first meeting. They would like a trail that goes through. But again, what you want to do is give the board, you know, some options on, or, you know, work with other agencies that might be able to utilize that, and then kind of leave it more open-ended on, well, what can we get for it? Because there may be some other things that the district would be able to get for that property, as opposed to just giving it away. Does that make
Okay.
sense? It just, again, just a way of looking and phrasing things.
It's the phrasing that we're discussing, I think.
Yeah.
Because if the rest of the committee agrees, it's truly surplus and should not be retained for educational purposes.
Correct. I
So-
heard you loud and clear on that.
To say yay or nay.
I'm in
So does
agreement.
this get put to a formal vote? How, does someone make a motion? How procedural? What do we do?
It's a discussion item, and you've heard one of your members have a point of view. Are there others that don't have the similar point of view?
Hands been up for a while.
Mr. Goss,
What we would like to see is the committee being able to reach a consensus on each one of these. Is it an educational, can it be used for educational purposes or not? Maybe that's a better way to start on this.
okay, Mr. Gosney,
Thank you. Actually, we have two issues here. First, whether we should make a recommendation that the board declare this as surplus property. It cannot be used for an educational purpose. This is where Brown Act group, we actually have to have a motion and have a recorded vote on that. And then the second issue is on what our recommendations for future use might be.
Mhm.
When it's appropriate, I'll go ahead and make a motion that we declare it as surplus property, or make a recommendation that it be surplus property. But with regards to what Jim was just discussing, originally when this first came up, I was just thinking, yeah, let's fence it off and declare it condemned. It has no value to us at all. I have to agree with that 1,000%. My concern about the residential reuse, or actually any reuse of the northeast section, is that, as we were told by one of the meetings, there are CCRs in place right now that restrict that it can only be used for residential. And even worse, one-story residential. Which means you can't put apartment complexes on there, not multi-story complexes, which really restricts what can be done. Whether it should be sold off and take a one-time payment for it, that's a different discussion. As far as the south area, I have to disagree with Mr. Sanders on this. I do not like deeding it off to the park district. I mean, that made it sound like it was a giveaway. And I don't like seeing giveaway. I said, find a way to trade properties, find a way for them to give us some money. That's a little bit different story, because in my opinion, our goal is to maximize revenue to the school district, not to do what's best for the community as a whole, but for do what's best for the school district. And giving away property that has a value is, in my opinion, not best interest of the school district.
Well, I'm not wedded to the word give.
Or you said, I mean, you used the word deeded, and I wasn't sure exactly what you meant on that. So as long as we make sure it's understood that our recommendation would be to get some kind of monetary compensation or
Well,
recompense on that. That's,
Yeah, no, but just to defend the idea of letting go of the property, if we continue to hold the property, then are we responsible for the maintenance? Are we responsible for any hazards that might be considered the district that I'm talking about? Is the district responsible for anything that might occur on that property? Does it have an obligation to supervise the property? By,
As the owner of the property, those questions you raised become inherent upon the owner of the property.
So one of the questions that I have from what I'm hearing, and I'll leave to our experts. So Scott, could the committee deem a property, identify that it cannot be used for educational purposes, recommend that it be deemed surplus, and then make the recommendation that the highest and best use be for ongoing revenue to the district? How specific does the recommendation need to be? Because I think I'm hearing some consensus with that. And so I'm just wondering, what is the level of specificity that would need to be provided in that recommendation? Because I hear a lot of agreement. And so I'm just wondering if there's a way to capture that consensus and meet the requirements of the report.
Yeah, and that good point. So what the specificity, again, with the threshold question, if the committee, agrees on the threshold question, this is not a site for future educational use, then the direction that we would propose that the committee come back to the board in terms of a recommendation is to dispose of the property, to create the highest value on an ongoing basis, revenue-wise for the district, and leave it at that. Because, Don, you mentioned, and we've talked about this, it is limited, to residential uses by zoning, their CC&R deed restrictions. I thank you for remembering all of that stuff because it's important. But the market's going to determine what the value is. The goal of the committee and the district will be to get the maximum value that they can. And again, I always like framing this in a way that not just selling it, because that's one-time money that's restricted, but creating, revenue, exchanging it or doing something that creates ongoing revenue for the district. Because when the district goes to dispose of the property, they're going to have to go through or they should go through like an appraisal process to make sure that, all right, the uses, you know, that's the highest and best use and the highest and best value. And again, I would suggest that the committee frame this from, you know, not taking it outside of that, but saying that, you know, we'd like the district to use this asset to create a source of ongoing revenue. And that could be through an exchange or ground lease.
Okay.
Can I ask one more quick follow-up question and then we'll get to Mr. Gosney? Because we understand that that there's some we've heard some interest from the committee in regards to workforce housing as well. Can the committee make a recommendation that says this or that, or the board should consider these things for this property and it not be one specific thing?
Absolutely. They should consider, I think that's perfectly appropriate to consider different options. Now, what will happen through that process is that, let's use the, you know, this site because we're talking about it, and it's limited to 26 single family residences. So if you were say, I want it to be workforce housing, it's still going to be 26 single family residences. And is that the highest and best value? I don't know. I would suspect it's not, but I don't know.
Okay, I don't actually know, and so I just want to make sure that the committee kind of understands the bounds. So, Mr. Gosney?
We're running out of time and this is the low hanging fruit. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a motion right now, bifurcating this discussion, but make a motion. Sorry, put the glasses back on. That this committee recommend to the board that this is not sustainable for educational purposes, and we recommend it be declared surplus.
Do I have a second?
Second,
Who's that? We have to list names.
Summer,
Thank you.
Okay, and now we'll go for a roll call vote. Mr. Gosney,
Yes.
Mr. Sanders,
Yes.
Ms. Chand,
Yes.
Ms. Torres,
Yes.
Ziegler,
yes.
and I believe that that is everyone. I just want to make sure. Okay, terrific. Motion is unanimously approved. 5-0
Sorry,
So that's with respect to surplus. Now, do we have
for
to do,
CVU specifically.
for CU specifically, do we have to do, or should we do the other two items? I can't see, if you could elevate it a little bit so I could see the boxes.
I wonder if maybe
Thank
we
you.
want to do. If there's a recommendation to deem it surplus across the 4 properties and then move to the second one, or do you want to stay?
so you said surplus properties or what?
So there's
Deem all
4
4.
properties, so
Oh.
the motion was for Seaview specifically, so I wanted to ask if the committee wanted to go through that exercise for the remaining 3 properties and then come back to the next level. Or if the desire was to stay on Seaview for the next.
I think it's an easier meal to digest with taking it one bite at a time.
I
Okay.
agree.
Perfect.
So if I can interrupt, the idea of workforce housing is gonna be something in consideration for all 4 of these sites. I would say we not talk about it 4 separate times. I'd like to make another motion that this committee recommend that if feasible, the board find a way to use each of these sites for workforce housing.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it. Samantha.
Torres, thank you. And now we'll move to a roll call vote. Mr. Gosney,
Yes,
Mr. Sanders,
Yes.
Ms. Chand,
Yes.
Ms. Torres,
Yes.
Ms. Ziegler,
Yes.
thank you. Motion approved, 5-0.
And Don, just so I'm clear, that was a motion for each one of the sites, so that would append to each one. Is that? Okay, that's what I had. I just wanted to make sure that I understood that correctly.
Okay, are there any other motions at this time?
With regards to CV,
We need we need to dispose of it. Or
Well, we-
make a recommendation about it. I mean, we've declared a surplus. But we haven't made a recommendation about, the priority uses. The site encumbrances clearly are the CCRs and the location.
Mhm.
You mean the identified use now that we've tagged it as a surplus property, Seaview?
So site encumbrances are. I just wanted to take this as an opportunity to show here.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So that needs to be added here, the definition of a site encumbrance. And so a site encumbrance are the details related to the site that create restrictions.
Got it.
And so I think we know. Mr. Sanders, I'm sorry, you were recommending the identification of those as the site encumbrances?
There are the CCRs,
Mhm.
the railroad, the proximity of the railroad,
Mhm.
the floodplain. Yeah, read anything else?
Yeah, there's 2 high-pressure gas lines
Okay, well, I guess or Kermit or somebody,
and 2 railroads. 2 railroads.
Santa Fe and UP, Union Pacific.
Yeah,
think we
Union
should-
Pacific is in Santa Fe, correct?
ability,
The remoteness.
The remoteness, yes.
of the site.
Okay. Are there any additional site encumbrances that anyone would like to add? Mr. Gosney?
not on site encumbrances, but when you get through that, I got something else to bring up.
Terrific, I think.
Okay, without a specific proposal for each one of these sites. I mean, trading the property with some other business or selling the property outright, without knowing that for each of these things, what's on the table. I think it would be inappropriate for us to make a recommendation, to do one versus the other. I think that we all want, and since we've already considered workforce housing as a top priority if it can be made to work. Once we decide whether each site should be declared unsuitable for educational purposes, perhaps we could just take all 4 of them and say that the district needs to find something that find a reuse for the site that can potentially bring in the highest amount of revenue to the district
Over the longest period of time.
over the longest period of time.
Yeah.
I mean, is this something that people might be agreeable to?
Sounds like
Of
I
the
might
committee, I
have a
mean.
motion.
I'm sorry, I'm just putting out for kind of discussion first, to get feedback from just me and Jim here.
So what you're suggesting is the priority for identified use would be workforce housing and the secondary would be highest revenue for the longest period of time. Is that
Correct.
correct?
Yes,
Yes,
sustained revenue for the district.
I
mean-
think that makes sense. The only concern I have, and this is jumping around a little bit, is that the Portala site is the home base for the virtual school and for a charter school right now. So if we choose to surplus that property, they are actually then going to have to be placed somewhere. And potentially this would be a board decision, but potentially displacing a district school.
As I
Excellent
understand it,
point, but yeah,
the portables, where the portables that exist at the moment, that is not subject
Correct.
Got it. Okay, we're safe then. Thank
No,
you.
you're good. It's just a vacant land, Summer. It's just a vacant land.
Back to my original question about, any other thoughts from the rest of the committee? I'll make a motion if not. I'm not hearing anything, then I will go ahead and make a motion that on all 4 of the sites that this committee recommend that as an alternative to workforce housing, that they find something that is bringing sustainable revenue over the longest period of time.
The greatest, the highest,
Sorry,
the highest value. And, a sustainable revenue just means, out of $1 a year in perpetuity, that's sustainable revenue. But if we want the highest and best use, we have to follow what's considered the highest best use, which means the highest value.
give me 2 seconds. I'm just adding some words here.
Maybe the way to address that is to, I mean, the highest, how you've got it worded right now, all sites to be surplus, sustainable, highest, or sustainable revenue for the longest period of time. So the board should consider, the highest and best use to create the most potential sustainable revenue over the longest period of time.
Yeah, there's a term in economics about the net present value.
Yeah, there's a lot of terms about in financial world. That present value is one of them. There's internal rates of return, discounted cash flow analysis. But again, the goal, I think, is you have an asset, and if I understand what everybody is saying here, or is that the goal is to create the highest value that will create the best sustainable revenue over the longest period of time.
Right.
And it goes without saying that that's, going to be worked into what the market constraints are. We talked about all of that. So again, if it's for the Portola site, which we have up on the screen, then that is going to be more than likely some kind of a residential type development, but the market is going to dictate that.
Okay, but back on the motion, I'm agreeable with the language that you presented. So we can find a
Highest
second.
value of sustained revenue for the longest period of time.
I'm okay with that, if we can find somebody with a second.
Do we have a second?
Second,
Could you,
this is Summer.
would you read it one more time, please, as you've written it?
Absolutely. So the motion on the table is that as an alternative for workforce housing, that it would be for the highest value of sustained revenue for the longest term.
And what does that pronoun it refer to?
Well, I didn't write down all the words. I'm sorry.
I don't find that language very clear. I can
I'm-
see.
I also
Right,
think
for
it's a very
language.
redundant. I think a lot of those missions are already inherent into the definition of the 7-Eleven committee's goals.
Okay, but when we make motions, the words we use determine what
The
happens.
vote.
Words matter.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Was the recommendation highest value?
It should be
of-
highest revenue.
Greatest return over the longest period of time.
Yeah, or something along that line. Greatest return over the longest period of time.
Okay, once again, we need to come up with the words for the motion itself, start to finish. You already had something started, Melissa.
Gotta learn how to write faster. Okay. Where's that shorthand class when I need it? As an alternative to workforce housing, that the highest
Good.
And best use would be the greatest return over the longest period.
Yeah, the district should seek the greatest return over the longest period of time.
District. Okay. Alternative to workforce housing, the district should seek the greatest return over the longest period.
See, to me, the term greatest return, it creates some ambiguity. A greatest return could be, it's a good community servicing, function, or it doesn't necessarily indicate revenue. It kind of,
Right, so would you like the greatest dollar value, the
Highest value.
denominated in dollars?
How about as an alternative to workforce housing, the district should seek the highest value over the longest period or the highest revenue over the longest period?
Financial return.
yeah, financial return, profits.
How about using the term highest market value?
There you go.
Highest market.
That work for you, Doreen?
Because that will take into consideration, what the site is, the political and geological and economic considerations.
Yeah, that ties into, commercial terms too. So yeah, that sounds more
Okay,
market value.
I have as an
Personally disagree with that language, but if we're gonna vote on it, I know that the majority will decide.
I prefer that we have a consensus of all five of us. So if you got a problem with a particular word or term, I'd like to hear an alternative.
Sure. One, I think we're kind of stating, in my opinion, we're restating the mission of the 7-Eleven committee. I think our goal is already to find the best use of the resources that the school district has. So that's one point. And the other point is that I don't think that highest return of investment in money, dollars, market value should be a priority in this. I don't personally believe that is such a high priority when using public resources like this, simply because if we discuss only trying to make the most amount of money, we're missing out on other opportunities, other types of value that gets lost, value of, things that are not measured in dollars. So that's my problem with it.
But the revenue, the highest revenue we can possibly potentially get from these land will then fund those other opportunities in the district. So if you don't put that, monetary value or language, then you may not get the best, opportunity from a potential person looking to lease the land to generate the money that's going to fund the entire general fund that we talked about earlier. So it would be in our best interest to go for the highest value, monetarily speaking.
Right. What I'm saying is that in terms of, we're making a motion that for all these properties, we should be considering that. I don't believe that's necessarily true for every property. The reason I say that is because some of these properties, the district will never, ever be able to bring back. If it gets developed into something else, if it gets leased out, it may no longer be part of the district's I guess we call it ownership of through the district. With the way that the price of land is going, there's more to value of owning land than simply making the most amount of money.
No, I think own the land, the district would still own the land because we're flagging it as a surplus property, meaning we don't need it for educational purposes. And then now we're talking about how should we use that surplus land. And so we want to use it in a way that's going to generate the most amount of money to fund the district overall. We're not selling land. The option was to lease. If our first priority was the workforce housing, and if that's not feasible, then the suggestion being made here is to try to get the most money out of those existing pieces of property. I don't think we talked about selling it, right? Maybe I missed out.
No, you did not miss out, because again, our recommendation all along has been, don't sell your assets, but you can lease them or you can exchange them. So you still have the asset, Samantha. You're not getting rid of the asset. It may be in a different location. But you're not getting rid of the fundamental, the little piece of gold that you've got, which is your land. You can't use that piece of gold, but you can use another piece of gold somewhere else. That's what you want to do. And again, that's the implementation part of it. What you're asking the board to do, through the motion that's on that you're considering, is to create the greatest return over the longest period of time, based on the highest market value. So you're going to take that, and the market's going to determine, because you can't use that asset for what the district's purposes are, but you can use another asset, which is, it could be for, another school site, or it could be for generating revenue. It gives you options on that. That's the implementation part of that.
I mean, I understand all your points. What I'm saying is that we have an opportunity here to give our school district, I don't know, I think if we focus on return on investment and making the most money, as opposed to maybe, if there's an opportunity for, I don't know, nonprofit getting involved, there are opportunities to use this land in other ways that may not be making the most money for the district, but have a lot of value otherwise. And I think that by mentioning revenue and by mentioning market value, we're missing out on other opportunities. That's my issue.
I philosophically agree with you. I mean, I think if this was all about just philosophy of public service and the greater good, then I wholeheartedly agree, right? That it's these public entities should be working together for community. I also am a district employee, and I know how narrowly we just avoided a teacher strike over pay. I know how many schools are falling apart and we don't have the money to fix them. And if we don't generate revenue to help solve some of these chronic issues, our kids are never going to get what they need from our system, and we're not whole in a way that allows us to support another system, or quite frankly, have students who are prepared to go support those systems.
And I would just add that I sit on a nonprofit board, and you'd be surprised how much private money flows into that too. So it wouldn't negate a nonprofit from considering the property for use. Again, we, being in the position we want to make sure that we generate the most return to be able to help the district in a variety of ways.
Great, thank you. I do appreciate those comments. I am also a district employee, and I know that a lot of the issues with the schools and the strike that we narrowly missed.
Ms. Torres, I believe we lost you. Are you back? Sorry,
Hello?
you for a second.
Am I back now?
Yeah.
Maybe it's my, yeah.
No, I can hear you, Samantha.
Okay, thank you. Just quickly repeating what I was saying. The strike that we narrowly avoided is not always necessarily for a lack of funds, but a lack of management of the funds. So while yes, we have schools falling apart, while teachers are not getting paid well enough, we are not going to be able to, our recommendation isn't going to be able to fix all those problems. But I also think that by recommending this, that making the most money is in the best interest is also not necessarily the best use of public resources.
Mr. Gosney?
Thank you. I think we're all involved in our community. We all want to see what's best for our community. But here on this committee, we are supposed to be looking at what would be best for the district as a whole. And transferring a property to another agency or a nonprofit benefit the community, but how will it benefit the school district? How will it benefit the employees? How will it benefit the students that are attending our schools? I think that bringing in revenue will will benefit them more than turning it into a park or turning it over to a nonprofit or something like that. It's you're having to prioritize, and I believe that we need to do what's best to bring money into the district. My opinion. Thanks.
So do we have a motion?
I think we made the motion and we had a second.
So.
Summer Siegler seconded.
Could you read it again, please?
So as I have it, and I would love to be corrected if I'm not properly representing. Alternative to workforce housing, the district should seek the highest market value over the longest period.
Was there a word as at the front of it? Or is it an M? A-N?
Alternatively,
What is the first word when you started to read it?
As an alternative to workforce housing.
okay,
Well, that's fine by me.
as an alternative
Just
to
was-
workforce
I felt like
housing.
something was missing.
You're right.
All the 2 and 3 letter words are missing. I scratch, I'm so
Okay.
sorry. So as an alternative to workforce housing, the district should seek highest market value over the longest period.
With the greatest return over the longest period,
The greatest reason.
because market value over the longest period doesn't mean anything, but with the greatest return or the best return or something, over the longest period of time.
We started with greatest return, and then there was concern that that was vague and didn't capture market value.
Yeah, but market value over the longest period of time, that doesn't make any sense. Because market value is an instant in time, and so I think what you're trying to do, or what I sense, is being discussed here is the best return with the highest market value with the best return over, I guess the longest period of time. I mean, that says something. Now, you may not like what it says, that's fine, but that says something. The highest market value over the longest period of time doesn't mean anything.
Already ran out of paper, that's why I don't have any S's or N's, so the motion that I have is, as an alternative to workforce housing, the district should seek the highest market value with greatest return over the longest period.
With the best return over the longest period of time.
Sorry, best return?
Yeah, best return over the longest period of time. Highest market value with the best return over the longest period of time.
As an alternative to workforce housing, the district should seek highest market value with best return over the longest period of time.
I can live with that.
And so motion made by
Don Gosney.
Don Gosney.
Summer Siegler, are you okay with that? That language, since you seconded it?
Yes.
And now for the roll call vote. Mr. Gosney,
Yes.
Mr. Sanders,
Yes.
Ms. Chan,
Yes.
Ms. Torres,
No.
Ms. Sigler.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-1.
Question that might help get us to unanimous. Would the word yield? I think I saw what Ms. Torres was talking about, that it may not necessarily be dollars, but yield in terms of some kind of program or something down the road. Would that help if you took the market value in terms of money and changed it to yield, which could be money, but it could be also, I don't know, the city of some place is going to run something for 40 years for the district.
Barry, yes, I think that we need to expand the definition of what the value is, but I think that the point of this motion specifically was to define highest dollar value as a priority. So I don't want to, again, my not approving of this comment doesn't mean, it's fine. But what I
Okay.
mean to say is that I think inherently by the mission of the 7-Eleven committee, we're already looking for the highest value of these resources. And I think that this statement is saying what it says, which is they are asking to make the most amount of money from these properties. And that's what my
The, um,
Yeah, Mr. Sanders, go ahead.
I'll try to keep my thoughts brief. Everything that Ms. Torres is talking about is laudable. Unfortunately, things are measured often in terms of that. When we're talking about value, we're talking about a monetary value. And I fall back on my economics training, and and it's kind of unfortunate in a way that, we're talking about exchanging things, one thing for another, and that's usually measured in dollars. So, historically, money is a medium exchange, the store of value, a unit of account. Those are the functions of money, and it's kind of this artificial construct that we live with. And so, as regrettable as it might be, we might not have a consensus with respect to highest value, because different people will value different things differently. But we have a piece of real property, a piece of the ground, and we're talking about exchanging the exclusive rights of those pieces of ground for something else that will sustain the district and make a contribution so that the programs that the district does provide can be sustained, not entirely by what we're doing, but in part by what we're doing incrementally. And so it's not that it's a bad thing, but it's what we have. I'm done.
Barry, question for you. I think what was your suggestion to say, and I don't want to negate what, I'm sorry, it's Samantha who's speaking on the nonprofit piece. So were you suggesting alternative be something that yields the highest value with the best return over the longest period of time? So there is some ambiguity for the board to then decide what they view as yielding the best value?
Well, too many words, I think, may just confuse it. I was looking at using something other than money, although James's point is spot on
Yeah.
in terms of the world we live in measures things in money. And so I was looking at if some organization would, for 50 years, I'll give you an example. I know of a charter school that was able to negotiate with the school district 50 years of free rent. That had a value. Not saying it was good or bad, I'm just saying it was. And no money changed hands. They just had this facility, which put a limitation on the district of doing anything with the facility for 50 years. That's what I was trying to get at, is terms of something that the district might value that was specific to West Contra.
Yeah, your example makes me almost want to take out the longest period of time, because you always want the opportunity to be flexible and change as needed.
But you also want to define that as not something that I'll take my money in a year and run.
Right. Yeah.
So that, and everybody's going to define longest in different ways.
Right. Good point.
Okay. Do we have anything more on CVU?
So I don't believe that we have a public comment. Just 1 second here. We have a couple of public comments. First, Ms. Lim.
Hi, good evening. This is Rachel Lem with the East Bay Regional Park District. Thanks for giving me a quick chance to speak this evening. I know you mentioned it earlier, but I just wanted to reiterate that we are interested in potentially having a trail easement through the Seaview site. This would be part of the Bay Trail and would help connect the communities nearby to this recreational asset that we have in the area, and will also help us link some pieces of the Bay Trail together that we have on kind of either side of the Seaview site. I think any development out there would probably end up requiring an easement anyways as part of the conditions of approval. So we're just hoping that as part of your recommendations, you consider recommending an easement to us for trail usage to help us in our trail planning and to make that asset available to the community. Thank you.
And we did have another hand, but it appears that it went down. I just want to check. Oh, yes. Ms. Smith-Foltz?
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to thank the committee for doing its due diligence and really wrestling and having conversation and healthy pushback on the wording. As a school board trustee, even in the best circumstances, what you come up with is going to be probably longly debated. So the best use of words would always help us to know your true intent. That's all I wanted to say. Ms. Payne, I can't see if there's another board member on here, but if there are 2 other board members on here, only one more of us can talk, or we will be in violation of the Brown Act. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're by yourself tonight. I'll make a motion that we recommend to the board that an easement be allotted for the Bay Trail for Seaview.
I second that motion.
Okay, give me just 1 second. A motion that an easement be
Allotted for the Bay Trail.
for the Bay Trail.
Continuation of the Bay Trail.
Yeah.
Can I suggest a different word than allotted?
Sure.
I would like to suggest negotiated or determined in conjunction with East Bay Regional Parks.
Sorry,
So negotiated or determined in conjunction with East Bay Parks.
Pardon?
I was repeating your language.
What Scott's referring to, an easement has value. And when you grant an easement, think of your own house, somebody to cross it, your property. What do you get as the owner?
What I,
Good point.
again, I think that the goal is a good goal on that, but that still needs to be determined exactly where an easement would be. Is it going to impact the value of what the site is? And again, maybe negotiated as more of a business term than you would like to use. But I think it just needs to be, you need to sit down, or somebody at the district needs to sit down with East Bay Regional and figure out what that is and where is it going to be and what does it mean?
And as one of the committee members pointed out, your basic goal is to have the most amount of funds for your school district because nobody else is going to do that for you.
this is one of those times, even though I talked about how important it was in bringing revenue, this is one of those times where it benefits the district, it benefits the community to have the Bay Trail on this site.
Not disagreeing at all. I like that idea, but what is it going to mean to that site? And again, I still think it needs to be determined, so you're not contradicting something where you make something that, that you have right now worth a lot less. And maybe that's okay, but you should at least understand that.
Give me 2 seconds here. We're jotting down a couple words. Maybe I can read them later.
So maybe the wording is that what you'd like to impart to the board is that the board work with the district on establishing an easement.
Okay, what I've got here is that I'll make the motion that the district had eye surgery, I need glasses. District negotiate an easement for the inclusion of the Bay Trail on the site. From our vendors or consultants, does that sound workable?
Yeah, that's work with, negotiate. I mean, negotiate is a little harder word, and I don't mean that in any other way other than it's more, either work or negotiate, either one of those. The idea is to cooperate with the Bay Trail. I think it is a good thing, but it needs to be worked out as to what that means.
I'd like to continue with, use the word negotiate, because I think
I'm fine with that. But
Okay.
you had 4 other people that need to be fine with it.
So the district negotiated an easement for the inclusion of the Bay Trail on the CV site. That is my motion.
There was a second.
I'll second.
Who's that?
Ms. Torres?
Samantha.
Thank you.
Okay, and now for a roll call vote, Mr. Gosney,
Yes.
Mr. Sanders,
Yes.
Ms. Chan,
Yes.
Ms. Torres,
Yes.
Ziegler.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, so in the interest of respect and appreciation for everybody's time, we have gone 16 minutes over. We do have great momentum, so we do have approved motions for Seaview, for recommended use. And but we did not get to the 3 other properties, so it is already 8:16. I want to open it up to the committee to see if we want to try to continue to push forward, or if we'd like to
We
move this
move-
to the next meeting.
Personally, having not had dinner, I would like to pick it up 1 week from today. If possible.
How does that date sound for everyone on the call? Because that could expedite scheduling.
I can make that work. We all missed the school board presentation at the city council meeting tonight while we're here. But at least that's on YouTube.
So you're proposing March 7th, 6 to 7 p.m. or 6 to 8 p.m.?
Melissa, that works for me.
It
So,
should work for me. I might be a couple minutes late.
so March 7th from 6 to 8. Okay, so it sounds like that's a date that works for, okay, terrific. So what we'll do, thank you so much, everyone. I think we had a really great meeting tonight, and so I'm going to produce kind of the compilation of all of the materials so that you'll have that and get that sent out. We'll have someone call tomorrow to try to check the availability for March 7th from 6 to 8 for next week, so we can continue the great dialogue and momentum of this evening. And so with that, I'll do a quick check for the good of the order. And then just an overall appreciation to everyone. Thank you so much.
Motion to adjourn.
You're on a roll.
Motion to adjourn.
Got a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Motion to adjourn, second roll call vote, Mr. Gosney.
Yes.
Mr. Sanders.
Yes.
Ms. Chan.
Yes.
Ms. Torres.
Yes.
Ziegler.
Yes.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Be safe. Hopefully, we'll see you in a week.
Good night.
Good tonight, people.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah,